Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome. So my name is Anna Crane. I'm the Director of Planning for the City of Clayton. Thank you all for coming tonight, those of you in person and on Zoom. So hopefully all of you are familiar with the Engage Clayton website, where we have a page specifically dedicated to this project and process that we're here for tonight. If you have any neighbors who are unable to attend, we will be recording this and placing recordings of this meeting, as well as the other neighborhood meetings we've conducted on the Engage Clayton website. Tonight, we are going to do kind of a little bit of a quicker overview of the presentation that was made at the high school for the larger community meeting. The goal here is to provide some context, but then we really want to hear a lot from the neighborhood. Each neighborhood has different specific areas that they're concerned about related to this project. They have different questions. And so the point of the smaller neighborhood meetings is to be able to address those in a more specific setting. So if you are in attendance from a different neighborhood, you're also welcome to speak. But right now we're going to focus on the Skinker Heights, Tesson, and Wydown Terrace neighborhoods. So I'll just do a quick overview of the zoning that was presented during the first community meeting by our city manager. So what is zoning really? The map here on the right, this is displaying our existing zoning map for the specific area. Zoning creates different districts that allow different uses and regulations. The yellow areas are single-family residential zoning districts. And you'll see that our larger institutions that we have here, Washington University, Fontbonne, and Concordia, are all zoned R2 single-family residential and regulated and allowed through a conditional use permit, which I'll go into in a minute. But what does zoning really do? So it seeks to do three things. Regulate the use of the land or the building. So what's operating there? Is it a cafe? Is it somebody's home? Is it a multifamily building? What uses are allowed on the site? The intensity of that use. So this really talks about kind of the operational impacts of a use. How many residential units are there? What traffic might be generated to the restaurant? What kind of noise or lighting might be generated by this use and the intensity of it? And then the bulk, which is that physical development. So now we're thinking a little bit more about how large is the building? How tall is it? What is its proximity to a property line or to another building? So all of those together kind of really help regulate the use and the operation of the site. So as I mentioned, right now, our institutions are located in single-family zoning districts and allowed through a conditional use permit process. So conditional uses are uses that the city allows within that property, but recognizes that they inherently have some aspects that might have impacts to adjacent properties or other uses that they're located next to. And so the conditional use permit process allows us to add regulations or conditions for that specific use on that specific property to try and mitigate those impacts. So the impacts might be things like additional traffic volume, parking needs that might not fit on their site, noise to adjacent properties, or other kind of impacts of the characteristic of the use. And so a conditional use permit grant is granted then to address the specifics of that development. So with institutions, what has happened over the years is that there's a stack of conditional use permits that apply to that property that have been granted over the years as a different development occurred. So Washington University has a new dorm on their South 40 campus. Now we have another conditional use permit process to go to, and we have to kind of make those conditional use permits that have been granted over the years work together, work for the use, and work for our community and our adjacent residents, which is a process that sometimes leaves a little bit to be desired, I think. However, conditional use permit process can also function properly for that property. So if it's a smaller institution, such as a neighborhood church, they are operating under a conditional use permit, but largely the scale and items over the years don't change related to that use. Or in this case, with Concordia's project, which they'll go into, it might be a really specific project that they don't have multi-year phase plans necessarily that they need to develop. They kind of know that project right now. So overlay districts come into play. understanding some of the large concepts that specifically in this case, Washington University would like to do with the property. The city said this is a great opportunity for us to update how we regulate that institutional use. And so an overlay district allows us to create regulations that kind of sit on top of the zoning, the single family zoning district, and modify that to more specifically address the operation characteristics of an institutional use. So right now, like I mentioned, we're starting with R2 district regulations that are really specifically developed to address single family dwellings that happen to be mostly on 60-foot wide lots. And so shoehorning an institutional use into that single family zoning district can create some conflicts and can make it hard for residents and the city to necessarily regulate it properly. So an overlay district, our idea here is that we would create that box for long-term development. Now we're going to recreate the base, that starting layer of our regulations to be really specific to that institutional use that is operating on the site. This creates predictability for the community. So instead of waiting until a conditional use permit comes for one specific project, we can create kind of this general box that applies largely to the institutional use. And then over time, when projects occur, we know what box they're operating within. And it also provides a greater, a level of certainty, whereas residents don't need to necessarily play as much defense or be as reactionary to that specific project because we've created a good threshold from the start. Overlay district parameters can address many things. The number one priority from the city's perspective when we're going to draft any sort of zoning regulations, but specifically an overlay district, is that we want to preserve the neighborhood character and protect the quality of life of our nearby neighborhoods and residents. So that's really the goal of this engagement process from a city's perspective, is to hear from these adjacent residents so that we know what aspects of the neighborhoods and the area that we're trying to protect as we write these overlay district regulations. In the years of looking at zoning, going through public hearings, writing these text amendments, there's pretty much three categories that we see come up really often when you are thinking about how do we protect a neighborhood. Number one, we hear we don't want to see the use. So what are the building heights? What are those buffers or transition zones that we write into a code to help mitigate potential of seeing the use? Hearing it. We don't want to hear it. So how do we limit the noise? That could be through hours of operation regulations. It could be through decibel level maximums that are allowed on the site. But really, we don't want to hear it. And then we don't want traffic or parking in our neighborhoods. So looking at how the site is accessed, how does it connect to the roadways? Where's the on-site parking? How much of the parking is there to make sure that the parking doesn't result in impacts such as somebody parking in the neighborhood and walking down the street. So when we think about those characteristics and what we're trying to protect, on the screen is an example of the sections that you will probably find within an overlay district. And the exact regulations under each of these sections, because it's an overlay district, are going to be really specific to that property or that type of uses that we're trying to address within the district. So there's purpose statements. Where's this district apply to? What properties within the city? What's the character of the area that we're trying to enforce? The criteria for review. What do we look against when we get a permit for development? So on everybody, again, is kind of understanding where we are in the starting point. Site plan and architectural review, what type of permit review is required for different projects based on the size of the development? Is it an addition? Is it a single building? Is it a new baseball field? What is the process for review? So that's, that's going to be specifically in the overlay district. Tree and landscape regulations, what do they have to plant? What do they have to protect? Parking, the development standards. This is where I think the opportunity for the most impact of an overlay district is. So the development standards, these are the same things that you'll see in a residential district. However, they're written really specifically to a single family house. There are ways through a conditional use permit that our institutions can modify those regulations, but that's kind of instead, let's just start out with what we want them to be. So what is the lot coverage, the impervious coverage of the site? Building density, that could include how many dwelling units on the property, that could include the overall size of the building in relation to the site. what's the height of the building, the layout and orientation, where's the front door of their buildings, how are they relating to each other and the streets that might surround them. Lighting, this could be, again, the type of light, it could be the brightness levels, it could be requirements for shielding and location, or setbacks, where can the building be in relation to other property lines or other buildings on the property. Transition zones or buffers, which is a big one that we would like to get feedback from people on tonight. So that's the area along property lines, maybe where changes of use goes from our institutional use to the single family residential, and how do we create that transition. Grading and drainage, accessory buildings, those are sheds or other kind of utility features that will inherently be built on the site. And then the permitted uses. So this is the primary uses, what's allowed to operate on the site, and then also understanding what the accessory uses that support those might be. So thinking about our zoning map again, we're proposing 2 overlay districts, one that covers the existing South 40 campus. So we have Forsyth to the north, Big Bend to the west, Wydown to the south. And then the second would be what we're calling the Big Bend overlay district, which encompasses the western portion of Concordia's campus along Big Bend. Concordia also has a project that's a big part of the whole sequence that we're going through tonight that would allow them to relocate the housing that's on that western portion of their campus east towards the chapel. That would be done under a conditional use permit. So that uses our process that's here right now. And as Concordia explains the project, you'll understand the difference and why we're proposing that under the conditional use permit versus the overlay districts for the WashU plan. And with that, I will turn it over to Concordia.
Hi, I'm Mike Lewis. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Concordia Seminary, and I'd like to work through our specific plan for the campus. This is a map of the existing Concordia Seminary campus. I've bounded it in green. It's about 72 acres, and it goes from Big Bend on the west all the way over to Des Moines on the east. We have right now 2 primary goals in front of us that we'd like to address. One of them is housing, the condition of our housing and improving housing. And the second one is working on creating a better sense of community on our campus. So what you have on the western side of the Concordia Seminary campus right now, on the Big Bend side, is married student housing that is about 25 years old. It was built in the mid to late 1990s, and it is, for a number of reasons, at the end of its useful life. We have a choice right now of either significantly reinvesting in that housing in that spot or relocating it. If we reinvest in it, we still have a number of problems with, I think, what was poor location selection and poor layout. And so what we have chosen to do is to move this housing that's on the western portion of the campus right now very much to the east, about where this road is. We also have single students on our campus living mainly in this dormitory here. This is a 1920s dormitory. It's been refurbished several times, but is still structured as a 1920s style dormitory. And we're going to build single student housing for those students, and we're going to move it west again, right here around the chapel on Concordia Seminary's campus. So those 2 things together, moving that housing will help us work on our problem of creating better community. We put married students close to the single students. They are also in close proximity to the faculty. We have 12 faculty homes up here. We actually have a few more than that, but we would be demolishing those as well. But we have 12 historic homes that have been renovated here. So married students, single students, and faculty living close together around the chapel and close to offices and classrooms. And what that looks like in this plan, this is a 2-dimensional view, much closer. This again is the chapel here. And to the west, northwest, and southwest of the chapel, we have 3 apartment buildings that would have 24 units each in those buildings. That would be for married students and their families. There are 9 townhomes here for the larger families. That's just north of the chapel. And then south of the chapel, we would build a 75-unit single student apartment building. These would be efficiency apartments. We've eliminated the roadway behind the chapel, and we're pushing all of the traffic to the very perimeter of this project, and we're building a two-story parking deck. For the most part, the housing is pretty close to a one-to-one swap. We would be getting rid of 75 units of married student housing that are close to the Big Bend frontage, but we would also be getting rid of those older faculty homes that I talked about. Those are the 1950s ranches. And then for the single students, we would be relocating about 75 of them from the dormitories into this new building down here. So again, we wouldn't be increasing the number of students, married or single, that are living on our campus. That population would stay about the same. And we would increase parking by about 25 spaces by adding this parking deck here. So what you have here is a side-by-side. On the right-hand side is the new configuration that I just explained. And on the left-hand side is the current condition. Probably the biggest piece here again is this traffic that now comes into the campus and goes around the western side of the chapel. This would be eliminated, creating a safer park-like setting for families and children in here, pushing the traffic to the exterior. On the right slide here, if you take a look at this little P, that's going to be the next slide. I just wanted to give you a little bit of perspective of what you're about to see. On the Engage Clayton website is the presentation from Clayton High School, and there are a number of ground level photos on that website, and I only have one of them here. You could look at the rest of them on the website. But this two-story parking deck is really pretty unobtrusive. There's a significant change in grade on the southern portion of our campus here. And if you can see this little white car up here, that's actually going into the top level of this parking structure on the existing grade. And this white car down here would be going into the lower level of this parking structure on grade. So this parking structure actually kind of fits right into the side of the hill that already exists. Again, very unobtrusive. And then finally, I wanted to show you what this looks like at the end of these projects, if all of this works out. On the eastern side of the campus, you have this park-like setting on DeMunn that stays the same. Most of our existing core of our campus stays the same, although there's about 25,000 square feet of currently unused, unoccupied space in this building directly east of the chapel that would be completely renovated. And that would be to take care of all of the people in the office building that sits right here, right now. The new housing and parking that we've discussed. And then Washington University will explain this a little bit later, but this is an overlay of an athletic complex that would be on the western portion of this campus. And with that, I will turn this over to Mary Campbell.
Thank you, Mike. I'm Mary Campbell. I run real estate for Washington University. When Concordia approached us about using the west portion of their campus, it gave us the opportunity to think about potentially relocating certain of our athletic uses down to the Concordia site, which would allow us to rationalize other parts of our campus. And two of the items that in our thinking are the softball and baseball fields that are currently on the South 40 campus up to the north against Forsyth, and relocating those down to Concordia. We are also thinking about the club sports that are currently at the CBC site and relocating them. Beyond that, we haven't really given much thought, but those are the ones that are on our minds right now. And I'm going to have you talk to my two colleagues here. We've been using two architecture and design firms. We've been using Bolin, Sawinski and Jackson, my friend Tom Kirk, and he's been working on the Big Bend overlay. He'll walk you through that. And then we've been working with Trivers on the South 40 overlay, Ross Welsh, and he'll walk you through that process too.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, everyone. Tom Kirk at BCJ. So just walking through everything Mary just talked about, here's sort of a graphic illustration of that. We're looking at the WashU main campus, Danforth campus. Right below that is the South 40. That's where WashU's undergraduate housing is. And as Mary mentioned, this softball and baseball field. And so what's interesting about this conversation when Concordia thinks about moving their housing over to one side of that parcel, this opportunity that Mary noted opens up where we can kind of not have this bifurcation of the South 40 anymore and move those fields down. And as Mary mentioned, maybe bring some of the activities from the South Campus, the CBD site, site up to this, what we're calling the Big Bend overlay district. So you have these two overlay districts, the South 40 housing, Ross will talk about that, and then the Big Bend athletics. And before we look at the Big Bend site, South 40 is contiguous with the Danforth campus. There's a lot of connectivity. So we want to think about how to bring that sense of campus and community to the Big Bend district. And when we think about that, we think about, really leaning into activating that with pedestrian and bicycle traffic, just like the kids get around on the main campus now. We will, of course, need a vehicle entrance, and you'll see the blue line you can see, you see on the screen where my cursor is it's a placeholder for a vehicle entrance. And we're showing that across from Oak Knoll. Miles to go and what that means and where that exactly will be, but that's just a placeholder for now. But the other thing you're seeing on this diagram is that green edges around both of these districts. You all know this because you live around there. There are wonderful mature landscapes at the perimeters of these parcels. So we would look to maintain that throughout this process, throughout the overlay process. So looking at the Big Bend district, Mike talked about what's existing on that site currently. You have the housing. There is an athletic facility on the site currently down at the bottom of the screen here. There's a field house. There's some tennis courts existing. And there's a field here that Concordia uses for their sports. So there are some athletic facilities there now. And the other thing of note is you can start to see some of the landscape at the perimeter of this site. We are not as far along as Concordia. They showed you some renderings, and if you've been on the Engage Clayton website, you've probably seen even more of their renderings. They're a lot further along in terms of the design. We're not there yet, but we do, as Mary noted, know that we want to bring those two fields, the varsity baseball and softball, and they're doing those are the outdoor activities. We'll need some buildings to support that, locker rooms, a team room, et cetera. But also if we can bring the club sports up from the South Campus, there is a gym there that they play, volleyball, club basketball, bring that up to this campus as well and integrate that with the locker and team room. So there'd be a facility to support, an indoor facility to support the outdoor activities. And again, what you're seeing on this diagram though, is we would look to locate those in a way to maintain that border around the perimeter in terms of the vegetated border and the buffer. And with that, I'll pass the mouse on to Ross.
Good evening. So we'll look at the South 40 in a similar way. The first slide, taking a look at the existing conditions. And we talked about the South 40 has street frontages on three sides, Forsyth, Big Bend, and Wydown, within a shared property line with several properties along the east side. You can see in the upper left corner of the South 40, the northwest, those are the softball and baseball fields that Mary mentioned that are the opportunity to move those to the Big Bend district. And you can just kind of see with the size of them that they are inconsistent with the rest of the development on the South 40. We took out the animations driving along Big Bend and Forsyth, but the point of those were to convey the existing experience. This is a quick snapshot of that as well. As we think about the existing box that's established by how far the buildings are off of the street, the size, the maturity of the trees that are there. One thing to note, the view center bottom, the view from Forsyth field does come a lot closer to Forsyth than any of the buildings do to Big Bend or to Wydown. And then the diagram to identify what could be facilitated by the overlay district. Again, the buffers are there intended to maintain a similar or improved experience from the current experience on all sides, maintaining them effectively the same in terms of experience. The the boxes and the labels that are on the drawing don't represent any kind of design or architecture at this point. It's diagrammatic about uses that could be facilitated with the overlay. The pink dots and dashes are a suggestion of, it's one of the goals of the district, is that with the ability to move the fields to a different site, that there can be an opportunity to kind of shift the center of activity on the South 40 closer to the Danforth campus, closer to neighborhoods where students live, and kind of move that activity and the students a little farther north and northwest on the site over time. This also shows, it's a suggestion of circulation from the Danforth campus in the upper right to the northeast down towards the southwest of the site, which would be tying into that improved Big Bend connector down towards the Big Bend district. With that, I think Anna's going to wrap up with a couple of next steps from the process.
Okay, thank you. So just a recap of where we are and where we're headed. So we are in the gather input stage. This is, we all recognize this a little bit of a unique process in that we're here asking for feedback and concerns and questions from the community without, other than in Concordia's case, without providing a detailed plan to you. But it is an important step to start this process early, and we think this will be a better process moving forward for the community. So hearing based on the really conceptual ideas that are presented by both of the institutions tonight, we want to talk through some of your priority concerns related to those. Then the goal is, based on what we hear from the community, is to actually draft some regulations. What overlay district regulations should be included? What are the points that Concordia Seminary should take back to their team and refine as they look into their design? Once we have overlay district regulations drafted, we will come back to the community again to say, here's what we heard, here's how we've translated this into actual regulations that can be adopted into our code, get more feedback on more concrete ideas from all of you, refine them further based on that feedback, and then start the formal process for adoption of a zoning district. So that requires two things. We have to go through a text amendment process to actually add the regulations we've drafted into our zoning code so that they are enforceable ordinances. And we also have to apply the overlay district to our zoning map, to the property in particular. That requires a public hearing process. So again, there'll be even more opportunity for formal feedback from the community in front of the Plan Commission and the Board of Aldermen before there would be actually any decision on whether or not to adopt the regulations. So lots of engagement to come. Again, we will put all of this information on Engage Clayton. So we encourage you to continue to check that site, continue to provide feedback. But tonight we are now going to open it up to questions, comments back and forth from the audience. So if you are here in person, please either come up to this microphone or raise your hand and Ryan can bring you a microphone. If you're online, you can use the raise hand feature and we will give you permission to speak. We've had both, so.
We got a green light. I'm Ward Klein and a resident of Clayton, and but kind of speaking from a point of view, also a member of First Congregational Church of St. Louis, which is right on your southeast corner of the South 40, as you know. And one, I applaud Concordia and WashU working together like this. I think these are two very important institutions for Clayton, Greater St. Louis, and I think you're thinking of what you're doing here, to me, makes sense on a personal basis. The only reason I'm here to speak is from a First Congregational Church point of view. We have had flooding issues through St. Louis MSD sewers that literally run under our church multiple times as we've had these historic rains these past 5 years. And so just an early on concern about if you're adding more housing to South 40, you're adding more hardscape to South 40. Just be aware, we already kind of have an issue. I'm not saying it's a WashU issue. I don't know whose issue it is, other than we're trying to run all the drainage through 100-year-old MST sewers and storms. that run under our church, that we have been flooded out at least 4 times in the past 6 years. So I just want to raise that up as an issue as you think about what you're doing with South 40. I don't want to get in the way of that. I applaud what you're thinking and doing with South 40, but we kind of need some help as you think through your hardscapes and your drainage issues going forward. So that's my comment. Thank you.
We don't have any hands online. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak, and I'll let you, if anybody else, yeah.
I had a question about the conditional zoning, changing from the conditional use permit to some overlay district. And you talked about how residents would not have to be so defensive about changes. And I'm not seeing where that, this just sounds like residents are taken out of the loop somewhat, because things have been halted because of residents' concerns. So can you explain what the benefit to the residents are of this change? Because it may help the planning and development services, and it may help WashU, it may help Concordia, but we're the ones who live here. So I'm not sure how changing, it sounds like taking some responsibility or some power from the resident comments or concerns and essentially making them less as a way, if you're implying that the residents have blocked or have been defensive about changes before, how this changes would, and as a resident, I'd be more interested in seeing this rather than concerned about it.
Sure. And it's a great question. That's not the goal. It's actually a little bit of the opposite. So by creating these overlay districts, our goal is to get the resident feedback about this type of a development of an institutional use adjacent to them into the hard code earlier. So right now what happens is we have a single family zoning district that's really designed and drafted to address single family development. And there are a few exceptions through a conditional use permit process that allow institutions to build the larger buildings or have the uses on their campuses that they do that are not what you would normally think of when you think of single family residential. But what happens is then we're trying to shoehorn mitigation of those uses and the institutions into a single family district through a conditional use permit only when they apply for that specific aspect of what they're doing. And so what we're able to do with an overlay district is take a step back and think holistically about institutional uses and how those operations impact or work with the residential community surrounding them. And we create regulations as a starting point that are more specific to that institution. So instead of saying, oh, now you're proposing a 4-story building and it's really close to the setback, and now that's going to be lights and noise out my window and there's nowhere else for it to go. We're at this place right now where we're early in the process, which doesn't happen very often in their new visioning. They haven't designed it yet. So we can say, here are the things that are really important to us, to the community and the surrounding area. And as city staff, we're able to write that into the regulation and make sure that WashU and Concordia are starting with that place, as opposed to they've already designed it and now we're trying to get them to change it. So I think it will, in the long run, help the community's voice be a part of the very beginning of the design instead of in the middle or the end. But it also doesn't remove a lot of the opportunities to provide feedback and review of projects when they are specifically proposed. So that's another element of the overlay that we talked about, or that I mentioned really briefly. The requirements for site plan review, which requires plan commission approval. There'll be certain aspects or types of projects that trigger that review. Same thing with our architecture review board or other permits. So there's still an opportunity for us to, within the code, write in and make sure that the overlay district doesn't remove the citizen process, the citizen communication when an actual development's proposed. All right, we got a couple of hands now. Katie, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Katie Huffman and I'm a resident on Wydown Terrace. And I was curious with both of these plans and the overlay, Fontbonne is right in the middle of the two. And I was curious how they're involved in the development of both of these areas. Thank you.
So both Mike at Concordia and myself at WashU, we have been meeting with Bon leadership consistently through this process. And they are very supportive. They are obviously going to continue to have a role with us in partnership. For instance, the South 40 and the, athletic fields that would be on Concordia's site. We're going to have to coordinate a path of travel on Big Bend. To the extent we can improve the Big Bend sidewalk, we would want to collaborate with them and see if that's anything they're interested in. Security, there's a whole lot of operational issues that we will continue to work with Fontbonne on for a very long time. And again, they've been a terrific partner with Concordia and WashU to help think through this whole corridor as our neighbor institution.
Nancy, you may unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm a resident on Ellenwood, actually. And we have a couple concerns that we wanted to put into the conversation. One is, I'm wondering about that parking lot that looks like it's being built, or parking structure that's being built. I can't tell exactly on the South 40. Is that now on the current parking lot, surface parking lot at the First Congregational Church? And so I'm worried there's a huge amount of traffic in the neighborhood because of the local schools. And that would be right across the street from the middle school. So I just wanted to make sure that the traffic ingress and exit weren't coming right there out onto Wydown. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that, well, I wanted to echo the concern about the district overlay as a process that would take residents out of the mix of reviewing individual proposals. And then I wanted to say that, we really like having students around, and it adds to the vibrancy of the neighborhoods, and sharing the really important kind of pedestrian spaces, especially of the, sorry, those are my cats, especially the pedestrian spaces of the neighborhood with them. But because of the security concerns for the university with the students, there's often a tremendous amount of lighting that is projected in the neighborhood. We live actually kind of close to the Catholic Church, and we got a lot of lighting that came out of the new Brown School building, which is beautiful, but we actually have to close our shades in our house at night because of the indirect light that comes, almost a whole block away. So I just wanted to make sure that there was adequate provision for protecting the character of the neighborhood and the kind of experience of residents who are here in those spaces and in those times. Thanks.
I'll just comment, just to assure you that we are not planning an ingress or egress out of Wydown. We're not, so just rest assured. I think we believe we hear your concerns about Wydown being already chaotic. So just wanted to share that. And just Anna, you may be a better place to put an additional comment on here, but certainly the overlay would regulate both the amount of lighting, especially for the athletic fields and the timing of lights. And it would also have lighting standards for the South 40 overlay.
Yep. All right. Any other comments? We plan to be here. So if you think of anything else, I'm really anything that comes to mind, even if you feel like it's been addressed right now, it's important to go ahead and voice it, even if you think it's obvious. Again, the process here, each of the organizations at this podium are taking different things away from it. So I'm taking away, what did the citizens What are they focused on? What are they concerned about? What do I need to address when I write a code? How can I protect, again, the quality and the character that they feel is important to their neighborhood? So I need to hear that in order to write it into the regulations, and Concordia and Washington University similarly want to hear your priorities and focus so they can redefine, refine their designs and plans. So there's no wrong answer when it comes to speaking at this meeting. So I'll just, anybody else have anything they would like to share, please raise your hand online. No, you guys got it all out in here? Okay. Well, if nobody else has any comments, then I guess we will close the Zoom down. If you think of anything after you leave here, please visit engageclayton.com. On the page, we'll post the recording sessions from all of the neighborhood meetings that we've had, and you will be able to provide comments back online. We have one more hand, and also there's contact on that page, you can contact us with questions too. So we do have one more online. You can unmute yourself now. Tomir, sorry if I mispronounced your name, but you can unmute yourself.
Tom Courier, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm just wondering, I'm aware that in the past, at least for the R2 zoning district, there was a density, a development density, I think supposed to be at 33%. And the existing ball fields allow the density further south on the South 40 to remain, to be theoretically at least under that 33% limit. And if you're going to be developing more of the South 40, I don't see how you can hold to that 33% limit. I don't know if that's absolutely a place you can't go, but it increases the noise and the overall city-like atmosphere as opposed to a more residential atmosphere.
Yes, there are regulations right now within the conditional use permit, and we intend to write very similar regulations into our overlay district. I know on the diagram that they showed of the South 40 campus and what could be done, it includes some reorganizing of all of the site and uses. So when we write our overlay district, we maintained that 33% building density coverage. They would have to remove some items before they could build other items to replace it to stay within that. It would apply to lot coverage in general, building all of the regulations that we might have. So if the 33% is where the neighborhood wants to stay, we want to hear that. If 40% is where the neighborhood wants to be, we want to hear that so that we can, again, work through how do we draft these regulations.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and again, refer back to Engage Clayton if you have any more questions or think of anything on your way home. I appreciate you all joining and participating in the process. Thank you.